My brother watched me unlock my first apartment, walked inside, looked around slowly, and said, "You know this exists because of me." He wasn't talking about help with the down payment. I'm 26 years old. I own a small apartment, $118,000, modest, mine. I have a degree in civil engineering and a job I worked hard to get. I have savings. I have a life I built, carefully, over years of choices that compounded into something I'm proud of. My brother is 34. He's renting a room in a house with 2 other guys. He works manual labor. He struggled since high school, never finished college, moved through jobs that didn't stick. He's not a bad person. I want to say that clearly before everything else. He's not malicious. He's someone whose life didn't go the way he wanted, and who needed, at some point, to find an explanation that didn't require looking inward. He found that explanation in 4th grade. Background: the 8-year gap. We grew up in the same house, the same parents, the same neighborhood. But we existed in different developmental universes. When he was in high school, I was in elementary school. Ages that don't overlap much in a way that matters. He was navigating teenage life while I was navigating multiplication tables. We were brothers, we shared meals, we watched TV on the same couch. But our daily worlds were separate. He graduated when I was 10 years old. That's important. He left the school system, left the environment where protection could even theoretically apply, when I had barely started. Middle school, the genuinely difficult years where social hierarchies crystallize and cruelty gets sophisticated and confident, I navigated without him. High school, 4 years of adolescence that actually shape who you become, done without him. My SAT prep, my college applications, my first job interview, my engineering program, all of it happened in a world where he was 8 years gone from those halls. But in his memory, he was my guardian through all of it. The protection narrative, his version. My brother has a story he tells about our childhood, and it goes like this. I was small, vulnerable, a natural target. The kind of kid who would have been eaten alive if someone hadn't stood between him and the cruelty of other children. That someone was him. Over our overlapping school years, he intervened repeatedly, staring down threats, warning off bullies, creating a force field of older sibling authority that let me walk through those years without trauma. Without his protection, I would have been beaten. Maybe badly. Maybe in ways that damaged me psychologically, created anxiety, fear, avoidance. Without his protection, I might not have finished school intact. I might not have had the confidence to pursue engineering. I might not have built the career that funded the apartment. The apartment exists, in his telling, because he scared off the Hendricks brothers in 4th grade. The protection narrative, what I remember. He claims he protected me from bullies. A few times, yes, maybe 3 or 4 incidents in elementary school. Over 18 years, those incidents have grown into an epic saga of heroic protection. The Hendricks brothers weren't going to kill me, they were annoying. The playground thing was resolved in 5 minutes. But in his memory, he saved my life repeatedly. Here is what I actually remember. The Hendricks brothers were 2 kids, a year or 2 older than me, who liked to needle younger kids at recess. They made comments. Grabbed things sometimes. Garden variety elementary school antagonism, the kind every school has, the kind most kids navigate by ignoring or reporting or eventually outlasting. My brother showed up once, told them to leave me alone in the language of a teenager talking to children, and they went away. Because they were children, and he was a teenager, and that's how that dynamic works. The playground incident. I remember being in a loose cluster of bigger kids, not surrounded in the way he describes, more like caught in the orbit of a group that wasn't welcoming. It was uncomfortable. He walked by, pulled me away, said something dismissive to the group. 5 minutes later I was playing with my actual friends. It wasn't an extraction from danger. It was a sibling noticing his little brother was somewhere awkward and pulling him out. The bus stop kid. I remember this one most clearly, actually, not because my brother's intervention was so dramatic, but because I remember standing my ground myself before he even arrived. The other kid backed off. My brother showed up afterward, assessed the situation, made some remarks to demonstrate he was paying attention. I was fine. I had handled it. These things happened. I'm not disputing the events. My brother was there, he involved himself, and having a teenager in your corner when you're 8 years old does mean something. I don't deny that. But there's a version of these events where the situations were ordinary childhood friction managed in ordinary ways, and there's my brother's version, where he repeatedly inserted himself between me and violence that would have permanently damaged me. One of these versions has grown over 18 years. The other is the one my parents remember. The visit. He asked to come over. Want to see what you've built, he said. I said yes, I was proud. I'd worked hard for that apartment. The down payment took 3 years of intentional saving. I chose it carefully, had it inspected, bought it below market when I found a motivated seller. It was modest but completely mine, and I was happy to share it. He walked through slowly, ran his hand along the kitchen counter, looked out the window at the street below. I made coffee. We sat at my table, in my apartment, and he looked at me the way people look at someone when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. "Nice place," he said. "Thanks. Took a while to get here. You know what made this possible?" He paused, not quite theatrically, but close. "Me. When you were a kid, I kept you safe. Those bullies in elementary school, the Hendricks brothers, the playground situation, all of it, I handled them. Without me, you'd have been beaten up, traumatized, maybe never recovered. Your education, your confidence, your career, all built on the foundation of my protection." I waited because I thought there might be more, some pivot toward what he was actually asking. "I want half the apartment," he said. $59,000. My share of what I made possible. I want to be honest, my first instinct was to laugh. Not cruelly, it was just such an unexpected thing to hear, said so seriously at a coffee table, that my nervous system reached for humor before it reached for anything else. I held it. I kept my face even. I asked him to continue. He continued. The argument, his. He explained the logic with the patience of someone who had worked this out thoroughly in advance. The incidents weren't minor, they were formative. Bullying at young ages creates lasting psychological damage. Kids who are targeted develop anxiety, avoidance, fear. They struggle academically. Their confidence erodes. They carry trauma forward into every subsequent phase of life. By protecting me, he had protected my psychology. The confidence I walked into middle school with, the stability that let me make friends, engage academically, pursue interests, that came from years of feeling safe. He had created that safety. The foundation he built in elementary school carried forward through everything that followed, even the years he wasn't there, because the person who walked into those years had been shaped by his guardianship. He knew he wasn't asking for all the credit. Just half. $59,000. I sat with it for a moment. "Name the specific incidents," I said. He named them. The Hendricks brothers. The playground group. The bus stop. He described them with the detail and urgency of eyewitness testimony from a recent event, the way kids had looked threatening, the way he'd stepped in, the way things could have gone without his presence. As he talked, I noticed that the Hendricks brothers, who I remembered as annoying, had apparently been dangerous. The playground situation, which I remembered as uncomfortable, had apparently been a near-physical confrontation. The bus stop kid had apparently been about to do something serious before my brother appeared. Each incident had grown in the telling. Not dishonestly, I don't think. He believed these versions. Over 18 years, the memory had found the gravity of the meaning he needed it to carry, and the details had rearranged themselves to fit. The argument, mine. He graduated when I was 10. I went through middle school and high school, the actually difficult years, without him. How did elementary school protection shape my SAT scores? My college applications? My career? He's claiming credit for years he wasn't even present for. I started with the timeline. "You graduated when I was 10, I said. "You weren't at my middle school. You weren't at my high school. The years where social dynamics actually matter, where academic habits form, where confidence either consolidates or doesn't, you weren't present for any of that. How does you scaring off the Hendricks brothers in 4th grade explain my performance on the SAT? My college essays? My first engineering internship? You're claiming credit for 18 years of my development, including 16 years you weren't there for." He had an answer for this. The foundation was set. By the time middle school came, I already had the psychological groundwork he'd built. The absence of fear. The presence of confidence. These don't rebuild themselves at each developmental stage. They accumulate from roots established early. His logic is unfalsifiable. You have confidence because I protected you. I can't prove I wouldn't have been confident without him. So he gets credit for my entire psychology, which created my entire success, which means he owns half my apartment. That's not logic. That's claiming everything by assuming everything. This is where his argument got structurally impossible to counter, and structurally impossible to take seriously. He was claiming credit for my internal states, my confidence, my psychology. Because I couldn't prove I would have been confident without his protection, he could claim credit for all confidence-adjacent outcomes. Because trauma might have derailed me, the absence of that trauma was his contribution. Because things could have gone differently, the way they actually went was his doing. I tried to explain why this was a problem. By this logic, I said, anyone who might have prevented something bad can claim credit for everything good that followed. The crossing guard who might have prevented me from being hit by a car when I was 7, does she own part of my apartment? The doctor who treated my ear infection when I was 9, if that infection had spread, theoretically, if things had gone very wrong, does he get a share? Every person who intersected with my life and didn't cause harm is a potential co-owner, by your reasoning. Where does it end? Those are strangers doing their jobs, he said. I'm your brother. I did it out of love. Family protection is personal. It deserves personal recognition. Older siblings looking out for younger ones is what older siblings do, I said. You weren't hired as a bodyguard. You did what brothers do. That's family, it's not a debt. Update 1, the parents. I called my parents that night. I told them what had happened, what he'd said, what he'd asked for. My father's response was quiet. He stepped in a couple times. Normal big brother stuff. I honestly don't remember any major incidents. You were fine, you were a normal kid, handled your own problems pretty well. My mother was less diplomatic. He likes to think he was more important than he was. Always has. He needs to feel essential. That's his thing. That phrase stayed with me. He needs to feel essential. Parents remember normal big brother stuff. A few interventions. Nothing major. He needs to believe he was essential. It's his thing. The apartment claim isn't about childhood incidents. It's about him needing his life to have mattered through my success since his own hasn't. My mother had identified something I'd been circling around without naming. This wasn't primarily a financial dispute. It was an identity crisis wearing financial clothes. My brother was 34, renting a room, watching a 26-year-old sibling own an apartment, and the gap between those two positions required an explanation that didn't place responsibility at his own feet. He'd found one. He'd been the reason I succeeded. Which meant my success was partly his success. Which meant my apartment was partly his apartment. The logical chain was fragile, built on inflated memories and unfalsifiable psychological claims, but it did something important for him. It gave him a role in a success story. It gave his childhood actions consequences that still reverberated. It made his life matter through mine. I understood this. I felt it. I had sympathy for a person who looked at the divergence between our lives and needed a narrative that explained it without requiring him to be the explanation. But understanding a need doesn't mean you fill it with property. Update 2, the hard questions. We spoke again. He called, wanting to know where I'd landed. I told him I wasn't paying. He came back with new emphasis on the incidents. More detail, more danger in the telling, more certainty about outcomes avoided. I asked him a question I'd been thinking about since the first conversation. Your protection theory, if it worked for me, why didn't it work for you? He went quiet. We had the same parents, I continued. Same house. Same neighborhood. You had all the same inputs I had, plus 8 more years of living before I was even born. You weren't protecting me from poverty or abuse, just from some kid stuff on a playground. I came out of that environment with an engineering degree and an apartment. You came out of it renting a room. If protection from playground bullying was so foundational to success, where's your foundation? You protected yourself too, presumably. The theory doesn't explain your situation any better than it explains mine. I asked why his protection didn't create his own success. Same household, same parents, plus 8 years more experience. If protection was so important, why is he renting a room at 34? He couldn't answer. Because the protection theory doesn't explain anything, it's just a claim on what I built. He said I was attacking him. That this wasn't about him, it was about what I owed. His choices were his business. My debt was separate. I'm not attacking you, I said. I'm pointing out that the framework you're applying to my success doesn't hold up. If protection from bullies creates the psychological foundation for achievement, then where's yours? If the theory is right, the same inputs should produce similar outputs. They didn't. Which means either personal choices matter more than you're admitting, which raises questions about my apartment, or protection isn't actually the key variable you're claiming it is. Either way, the debt you're describing doesn't exist. He hung up. Update 3, the family. The story spread, as family stories do. My brother told his version first, that I had turned my back on the brother who saved me, that I'd forgotten where I came from, that I was keeping property that morally should be shared with the person who made my trajectory possible. Some relatives were troubled. A few called or messaged. He did look out for you. He's struggling, and this would really help. Couldn't you just give him something? The word ungrateful appeared more than once. Others saw it clearly. My cousin, who knew us both well, called and laughed. He wants $59,000 because he was a normal older brother? Does he know that's not how it works? An aunt, less close to the drama, said simply, he needs help, but not the kind money fixes. My parents navigated carefully, declining to take sides publicly while privately telling me what they'd told me before. The incidents were minor, the inflation was real, my brother had always needed to be more central to my story than he actually was. I tried to hold the situation without bitterness. He was struggling. The struggling was real even if the solution was impossible. He'd looked at my apartment and felt something, inadequacy, maybe, or grief for a life that hadn't gone the way he'd wanted, and he'd grabbed for an explanation that transformed his pain into my debt. I recognized the human impulse. I couldn't honor the demand. I've thanked him for being a good brother. I mean it, when he helped, it helped. But thanks isn't debt. Childhood help isn't ownership of adult achievements. I can appreciate what he did without owing him my apartment. Gratitude and equity are different currencies. I wrote him a letter, not a response to the demand, just an attempt at honesty. I told him I was grateful for the brother he had been in those years. That the moments he'd stepped in, however I remembered them versus how he remembered them, were real moments of having someone in my corner. That I didn't want to erase or dismiss what he'd done. But I told him that thanks and debt were different. That gratitude for childhood help didn't convert into equity in adult achievement. That I could appreciate what he did without owing him property built by 8 years of work he wasn't part of. That his life had mattered, genuinely mattered, in ways that didn't require my apartment as evidence. He didn't respond to the letter. Update 4. The Ultimatum. A few weeks later he called one final time. If you don't pay, he said, I'll know what kind of brother you are. Someone who took protection and gave nothing back. Someone who would have been nothing without me and pretends he did it alone. I'll tell everyone. You'll be the ungrateful one who forgot where he came from. He needs significance. A role in my story. Evidence that his life contributed to something successful. I understand that need. I sympathize with it. But I can't fill it with property. My apartment isn't therapy for his self-worth. My success isn't his to claim because he scared some kids when we were children. I held the phone for a moment. Tell whoever you want, I said finally. Tell them I refused to pay $59,000 for some elementary school incidents. Tell them my apartment isn't a protection payment plan. I'll tell them the same thing I've been telling you. I was grateful then and I'm grateful now. But gratitude isn't debt. Childhood help isn't ownership of adult success. The apartment stays mine. What people think is up to them. There was a long silence. I stepped in for you, he said. The anger had gone out of his voice. What was left sounded like exhaustion, or grief, or something that lived close to both. I was there. I know you were, I said. That's true. That was real. And it counts for nothing. It counts, I said. It just doesn't count as $59,000. Those are different things. He hung up. We haven't spoken since. Resolution, the mythology and the apartment. A year has passed. He still tells the story. From what I hear through family, it has continued to grow. The incidents that were once described as a few times have become constant vigilance. The kids who were threatening have become violent. The elementary school years have expanded in his telling until they encompass my entire educational career, a saga of unceasing protective effort that supposedly shadowed me through graduation, through college, through my first job. The mythology grows because the payment was refused. If I had paid, the story could have stayed the size it was. But the refusal required justification, and justification required the stakes to rise, and rising stakes required the incidents to become larger, more dangerous, more clearly life-defining. The story is now proportional to the rejection, which means it will keep growing. I've stopped following it closely. Some relatives have settled into their positions. A few still mention it when I see them, in tones that suggest they think I should have given him something. Most have moved on. My parents are sad about the estrangement but clear-eyed about its cause. I think about my brother sometimes, not with anger, mostly with a kind of muted grief. He is a person who needed his life to have mattered more than the evidence showed. He needed a role in something successful. He found one in our shared childhood, in those few moments of genuine help, and he built that role into something that could carry the weight of explanation. This was a reasonable thing, almost a human thing. The mistake was believing that a need becomes an entitlement when it grows large enough. It doesn't. The final scene. A few months ago, I drove past our old elementary school. I don't know why, I wasn't going anywhere near it deliberately, just ended up on that street for unrelated reasons and recognized the building as I passed. I slowed down. The playground looked small, the way childhood places always do to adult eyes. Smaller than memory keeps them, less significant than the weight we've stacked on them. Kids were out at recess, some bigger, some smaller, the usual dynamics of childhood proximity and hierarchy playing out in the way they always have and always will. Normal stuff. Garden variety social negotiation. The kind every kid navigates, some with help and some without, and most of them come out fine either way. I was one of those kids once. My brother helped, sometimes. That's true. That's real. The playground disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror, and the school disappeared, and the neighborhood, and the childhood they represented, all of it fading the way the past fades when you're heading somewhere else. My apartment was waiting across town. The place I'd built, funded by savings my brother didn't accumulate, owned through decisions my brother didn't make, purchased with a down payment assembled from 8 years of choices made entirely without him. It was mine in every way that matters. I drove home. Final reflection. My brother wants $59,000 because he stepped in a few times when bigger kids bothered me in elementary school. He calls it protection. He says without him, I would have been beaten, traumatized, derailed. He says my apartment exists because he kept me safe. And in his memory, those incidents, which my parents remember as normal, which I remember as minor, which the involved parties have probably forgotten entirely, have grown into an epic of heroic guardianship that supposedly shaped every year of my life that followed, including the years he was 8 time zones of age and experience removed from. I've thanked him for being a good brother. I mean it. When he helped, it helped. Having someone in your corner when you're 8 years old and a teenager shows up to tell the bigger kids to move along, that means something. I'm not erasing it. I'm not pretending it didn't happen. But I can't thank him with half my apartment. Childhood sibling protection, the ordinary, unremarkable kind that older siblings perform for younger ones every day in every family in every school system on Earth, is not a debt that compounds interest into adulthood. Stepping in a few times when I was 8 years old does not make my brother co-owner of what I built at 26. The logical chain that connects elementary school to civil engineering career to mortgage payment requires so many assumptions, so many inflated memories, so many unfalsifiable claims about internal psychological states, that it collapses under any serious examination. He needed my success to be his success. He needed evidence that his life had contributed to something, had produced something, had mattered in a way that showed in the world. I understand that need. It is a human need. It is a painful need, particularly for someone who has watched years pass without the accumulation he'd hoped for. But I can't fill a need like that with property. My apartment isn't therapy for his self-worth. My success isn't his to claim because he scared some kids when we were children. Some needs can only be filled from the inside, and no payment I made would have addressed what he was actually looking for. So, the apartment stays mine. The gratitude stays real. The relationship is gone, and I mourn that, genuinely. I miss the brother I thought I knew, the one from before this claim, the one who stepped in without an invoice in his back pocket. The mythology he's building, where he saved me from destruction and I betrayed him by keeping what I earned, that stays his to tell. Some stories aren't true just because someone needs them to be. My apartment is one of them. Posted to r/eta, for all the people asking, no, I don't think I am. But I think about my brother every time I unlock my front door. And I think I'll keep thinking about him for a long time. Not all victories feel like victories. Some of them just feel like surviving.